In this video, I'm doing something a little different than what I did in the last two videos, where I just ran some basic Python commands in the terminal. Here, I'm going to use an online Python interpreter. This one's onecompiler.com. There's nothing necessarily special about this interpreter. There are so many, you can just Google them. You can find lots of online resources where you can just write Python code without installing anything. I simply picked this one because I think the display is nicer for videos. That's the only reason, but it's not going to run better or worse than any other resources. So before I get into that, let me just open up a new tab, and I can show you that you can just like Google online Python interpreter, and so many options will come up. This is one I clicked on. So here's another example. There are just lots of them everywhere where you should just be able to run code without signing up or giving any information. So this one has ads, not as nice of a environment, so I'm just going to use this one. I'm going to start by defining a couple of variables, which we've already done. Let's just actually start by saying x equals 2 and y equals 4. This is one way I can assign variables 2 and 4, but you can see when I hit enter, nothing's happening. It's not like in the terminal where as soon as I hit enter, the output is there. Here, I have to do something like, print x or whatever, and then I have to go up here and hit the run button. And you can see that I get the output over here. So I said to print x is equal to 2, and the output is 2 over here. Any sort of development environment that you use for Python is going to have very much the same workflow unless you're using the command line or the terminal, where there will be a place to code, there will usually be a run button or some sort of icon to pick, and then the output will display, or an error if you put something that's bogus, like print xx. You can see an error displayed here because I haven't defined a variable named xx. So again, there's nothing special about this, but it will get you used to the workflow of whatever environment that you choose to use to write your Python code. So the first thing I want to point out, we've done variables in the past like this, x equals 2, y equals 4. We can also do something like xy equals 2, 4. And what this is going to do is it'll actually give us the ability to assign two variables in one line. So x is x and print y is y. So if I run this, it says x is 2, y is 4. So it's assigned x to 2, y to 4, just in one line. And then with the print statement, just a couple of reminders. If I want to print some words, have it like literally print the words and not try to interpret it and find a variable value or something. For example, I want to print x is. I just enclose that in single quotes or double quotes. I always use single quotes, but double quotes will work also. And then I do comma to put my next thing that I want printed. And in this case, I want the variable of the value x printed. And then once I have a second print statement, it'll just bring me to a new line. I could print it all on one line, but so yeah, this is just something I hadn't done before, but it's comes in handy in a few cases, especially if you're returning multiple values to a function, things that you'll get into later. But for now, it's just think of it as a nice compact way to assign multiple variables. And they also don't all have to be the same type either. So I could do x, y, z, 2, 4, zebra. And I could print, z is z and run it. So two of them can be numbers. The third one can be a string, which is any string of characters. This might not seem unusual to you if you're just learning programming, but in general, a lot of programming languages don't like when you mix types into commands. This is more unique to Python. So another thing that's really important, but I haven't been able to show you before because we've just been doing like single lines in the terminal. Sometimes you want to write comments on your code. For example, I might want to just say something like, example, assigning multiple variables at once. So a comment is just a way to annotate your code so that you know what's going on. So right here, it's pretty straightforward to know what's going on. We're assigning 3 variables, we're printing them. But as you advance, your code will get much more complex, and it's useful to be able to label parts of your program with comments so you can read it and say, oh, that's what I was doing here. There are other purposes too, but it is very good for the readability of your program. And to write this comment, you'll see that these words are grayed out, and this isn't going to be recognized or run by the Python interpreter. So if I hit run, none of the output has changed. And if I start a line with a hashtag, then it's a comment. So it's not going to be recognized by the Python interpreter. It's just something for the programmer to be able to read, or anyone reading the code to be able to read. So I could even say something like print hello world and then run this code. And again, it hasn't changed the output, even though normally a print statement, if I didn't have the hashtag in front of it, like this, it would print an additional line here. So anything after the hashtag is a comment and is not recognized by your interpreter. Other ways that comments might be used is sometimes just for attribution. You might say something like written by Amy Fever, June 18th, something like that. So sometimes you'll want to put a comment at the top of your code so that someone knows who the author of it is, and then if you're working with a large team or if you're submitting a homework assignment, your teacher knows who wrote this code, because you can't write your name on the code like you would on a piece of paper. You also might use comments just for citing sources. So you won't do this right now because you really do want to get the foundations of your coding down pat right now, so you want to write everything. But maybe later on, you're writing a large program and you're like, oh, well, so-and-so did a similar program, so they are giving me permission to just use their code. And I might say something like, the code below is from, and then you probably have like some sort of GitHub thing. So just to make it clear who wrote what parts of the code and to give credit where credit is due. And that's another thing as a student I would especially recommend that you do. Make sure you're following your teacher's instructions, but if you use something from some external resource, it is good to give credit to make sure that it's clear that it's not a plagiarism thing. So what I've written here are single line comments. I've started with this hashtag and I've written just whatever I feel like after that. Sometimes you want to write multi-line comments. Say I have a much more complex piece of code, and it's not going to be something that I can write in one line. You can even see this line is kind of spilling over, and it gets kind of annoying to just write hashtags at the beginning of each line. So if you want to have a multi-line comment, you can do that, where you can write as much text as you want as long as it stays between a set of 3 double quotes, and then again, the interpreter just won't read any of this. So here, say I do print 2 within these 3 quotes. You can see program did not output anything because, again, anything within these 3 quotes, kind of like anything after the hashtag, is not getting recognized by the interpreter. It is just as a README or something to use for your own reference. So something I might write in here would be, this function takes 3 inputs, X, Y, and Z, not zip, all as integers, and then computes the area of the elephant wearing jeans. This is nonsense, obviously. Let's hope. But the point is, you could put multiple lines in one comment. None of it's going to be recognized by the interpreter, but you sometimes just need a little more space to explain your code or explain what's going on. So hashtags are great for one-line comments. these triple double quotes are good if you have multiple lines. One other thing I want to go over in this video is something called typecasting or casting. So one thing I showed you previously is I showed that if we had something like a value 6.99, this is a float. A float is a number with a decimal. And I had done something like this, where I did int of 6.99, and then it cut it off and just made 6. So if I print int of 6.99, and I run this, you can see the output is 6, and that's because an integer is a number without anything after the decimal place, so it cuts off the decimal place, or everything after the decimal. So if I do int of 6.99, this is called casting. So I'm taking a float, I'm taking something of a different type, and I'm changing it, or I'm casting it to an integer. And we can do this with values directly. I could have a value v, and I could say v equals 6.99. And then I could run this, and if I print int of v, it's still going to print 6. I will point out that this hasn't actually changed the value of v. It has only made it into an integer right here inside the print statement, but v is still equal to 6.99. So if you want to actually change v to an integer, what you have to do is you have to do it either here, like you could say v is int of 6.99, and then run it, and it'll make v into 6. Or you could have said v equals 6.99, and you could do a separate line where you say v equals int of v. And this will not just, like in the other example, temporarily change v to an integer of 6. This permanently changes v to type integer with a value of 6. So I could say type here for v and run it, and you can see that it's telling me the type is integer. And you can do this really wherever it's compatible. So I could have v equals 6.99 as a string. So this is basically a word. And then I could say print, and we could change this into a float. So it's going to output 6.99, and it changes it into a numerical value, a float, instead of being a string. But if I tried to do print int of v, that's just too much for it to figure out. It kind of freaks out because it's like I can't make this into an integer. It tries to take the string and interpret it as an integer, and that's just 2 steps, so I think it's too much for the interpreter. I could do v equals float of v, and then I could do v equals int of v. So I could do a 2-step process here. And then it would take the string 6.99, first make it into the float 6.99, then an integer, and then print it. I could also, if my string were 699, then I can cast that right to an integer. It won't confuse the computer if I do that. If I try doing this with anything that's not really compatible with an integer, something like 6, but as a word, it's going to give me an error. So you have to be careful when typecasting. You have to make sure the compatibility is there. We can also cast integers as floats. So if I have, let's just do it as a print statement. If I have the integer 7 and I cast it to a float, you can see it just makes it into 7.0. So it makes it into the same value, but with a decimal place. And I can cast something as a string. It's just going to be the string 7. So really what Python is reading it as is 7 with quotes around it. But when I put the output here, obviously we don't see the quotes around it because it's just printing it. So if I cast something to a string, then it becomes a string of characters, and now this is read as a string of characters containing the character 7, and it's no longer read as the numerical value 7. Any of these can be cast into each other, int, float, and string, but again, you'll get an error if you don't make sure that they are compatible before you do that. So that's all I want to cover in this video, just kind of wrapping up some loose ends. And yeah.